say ADHD, a lot of people think that it's some jumpy kid jumping around and doesn't have attention. It's a lot more than just attention. Children with ADHD can come up with new ideas and innovation and can bring some very different topics and make them intersect. Maybe folks with ADHD will lose interest along the way because their brain is always seeking novelty. People with ADHD, because their brain is always so revving up that they take alcohol as a soothing substance to feel a little bit calm. Folks like me with ADHD are very, very sensitive to rejection. It affects in relationships with your spouse, your partner, with friends, with your children. You cannot get a prescription from anybody for your ADHD treatment. It's very, very serious because this medication is very, very important. And you have to consult your general practitioner and a very, very experienced licensed psychiatrist. So let's break some myths about ADHD today.
Hey Subhasis, I would like to ask you one thing that you wish people really understand about ADHD.
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing that I wish people understood about ADHD. Yeah, this is understanding that I'm developing myself. But one thing that is very hard to get for people is that attention deficiency. Hyperactive disorder is mostly focused on attention deficiency. I think when you say ADHD, a lot of people think that it's some jumpy kid jumping around and doesn't have attention. But there is so much more to ADHD than just a jumpy kid who doesn't have attention. It has attention deficiency, of course. It has hyperactivity. It has some underlying conditions like anxiety. The biggest part that people should understand is folks with ADHD, kids, adults, their executive functioning, which is planning, organizing, time management, emotional regulation, these are not as well developed as people without ADHD. So that's the biggest myth that I would say I wish people understood.
Cool. Is it ADHD all about attention or it's something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. Is ADHD mostly about attention deficiency? The answer is absolutely not. Attention deficiency is just one ways in which it manifests, which is more obvious to people. As I can relate, think about a classroom where a child is not able to focus and are just sort of distracted. And we sort of sometimes jokingly say it, this kid has ADHD. But ADHD is a lot more than just attention. It's a lot to do with how our brain is wired and how it's not the same as neurotypical brain. So if you think of it as a neurodivergent brain and neurotypical brain, kids, adults with ADHD, their brain is wired in ways that their prefrontal cortex is not as developed, which is, the biggest part that gets impacted is executive functioning. It's very hard for someone like me to estimate the amount of time that anything might take. So I usually get my timing wrong about how much time a task will take. Similarly, the idea of remembering and following through, it's very easy for me to get carried away and jump into new ideas, but it's hard for me to follow through. And that's coming from that same aspect of lack of executive functioning. And there's a lot more to it, but in summary, ADHD is not just about attention deficiency.
And how does ADHD show up on your creative process? Let's say either you're working on corporate or you're working on a creative project. Does it affect too much to break down your flow?
Yeah, it's a good question. How does ADHD impact your creative process? I think it impacts both in good and not so good ways. Good ways that it may manifest for folks with ADHD is that, typically, again, I'm making a sweeping generalization. Typically, the ADHD brain is capable of thinking very laterally. It's not very sort of linear thinking. You can connect very different, diverse thoughts diverse ideas and diverse aspects and put it together. So in some sense, folks with ADHD, children with ADHD can come up with new ideas and innovation and can bring some very different topics and make them intersect. So then it becomes a strength. On the other side of it, when it's weakness, is if you have a long creative project and you have to be on the top of your creative game, maybe folks with ADHD will lose interest along the way because their brain is always seeking novelty. And when it becomes sort of these repetitive tasks, even if it's creative, a lot of creative work is repetitive, then they may lose interest. Similarly, finishing a project, when creative projects take time and efforts, and when ADHD brain or ADHD mind comes in the way, is that you don't tend to finish everything that you start. So that way it affects the creative process, both in good and not so good ways.
Okay. What's something that internet gets wrong about ADHD all the time?
What's something that internet gets wrong about ADHD most of the time? Again, I'm building my own understanding and knowledge about it, but I think a lot of, like every other subject, it's simplified a lot. As I have mentioned in my previous points, we sometimes sort of joke about ADHD. People with sort of lack of attention, we always sort of sweepingly generalize them that, hey, he has ADHD or she has ADHD. But it's a lot more serious than that. It actually impacts life in a lot more serious ways. People have career struggles. They have issues with relationships because of ADHD. They have issues with authority, with law. So there's because of emotional dysregulation, because of impulse control. So a lot of people with ADHD may end up breaking the law because of lack of impulse control. So typically internet simplifies it a lot, and the common cultural knowledge simplifies ADHD a lot, but it's a lot more serious than that.
And I heard ADHD and addiction go in a long way. What's their correlation?
Yes, that's a great question and not very understood easily, which is the correlation between ADHD and addiction. So because of how the brain works all the time, and we know that any sort of, particularly alcohol, which is known to soothe your brain, it's sort of treated as a brain soothing substance, particularly for ADHD, people with ADHD, because their brain is always so revving up that they take alcohol as a soothing substance to feel a little bit calm. And that's where, there's a strong correlation of how people with ADHD can get dependent on alcohol or any other such substance. The flip side, the problem is it's a double whammy. There's an addiction which you feel calm and soothed, but then what it does is when you start having alcohol, you cannot control it because of your lack of impulse control. So when you start drinking or start having some form of intoxication, you have a hard time stopping as well. So it is sort of a double whammy, if you will. You tend to get dependent faster, but you also have a harder time controlling it. And that's the underlying connection between ADHD and addiction, which is not very understood easily.
Okay. What's the hardest part to explain others when you have ADHD, a problem that you go through or the symptoms that you have? What's the difficult part to explain to others?
Yeah, what's the hardest part or difficult? I think more than explaining the difficulty part, it's about how you live your life with difficulty, which is not so obvious to everybody who is around you or the neurotypical people who are around you. For example, you tend to get very emotional about things. You tend to get defensive. So for me, for example, I have a hard time in accepting a strong feedback because it evokes an emotional reaction. I've been training myself to be comfortable with tough feedback, particularly because I didn't know my ADHD condition. So it was harder. So you might think that, hey, I gave him a feedback or I told him something very blunt and this person, he's reacting emotionally. That's the background of why somebody reacts, which is the emotional reactivity. There's another condition, another way it manifests, which is rejection sensitivity. Folks like me with ADHD are very, very sensitive to rejection. So I do not want to feel rejected by anybody, and that's just a part of my condition. The way it shows up is I'm always avoiding creating conflict in the fear of being rejected. I'm always, my natural state would be to avoid conflict or to avoid being honest with somebody with the fear of being rejected. So we struggle a lot with what is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD in short. And that's not known to people with ADHD, to the loved ones and the friends and the family of people with ADHD. And then that manifests in many ways. A lot of times it can manifest in, having conflicts, emotional arguments, or shutting down. It affects in relationships with your spouse, your partner, with friends, with your children. So yeah, in a lot of ways it manifests some of these underlying conditions.
Let's say, how can someone identify if they have ADHD or people around them has? Like, are there any visible symptoms or something that they need to check?
Yeah, how can you see ADHD sort of visibly outside? And that's the hard part. Unless you live with someone, unless you know someone, the only thing that's visible is someone's getting very distracted. Someone's very fidgety, particularly for children. It's probably easier because they're not fully developed, so they're very fidgety, they're very distracted, they're not able to focus on a task. So that's the visible part of ADHD. But for adults who have been living with this condition, even if they have gotten in control of their fidgetiness or try to somehow keep some focus, it's very hard to see someone with this. I think the underlying symptoms or behaviors to watch out for is, like I said, the emotional sensitivity, reactivity, someone's not able to plan properly, people are always struggling with time management, they're mostly late or they're procrastinating. Procrastination is another big way it manifests because of lack of time management. If I have to start a big project or finish a big project, because I'm not able to estimate how long it will take, I will not plan well in advance the time it's needed to finish the project. And it may come across as if I'm procrastinating. Similarly, fear of failure could manifest because I'm sensitive to rejection. I may not start something with the hope or the fear that it may fail. So when you start noticing some of these symptoms, some of these behaviors in somebody, whether it's children or adults, you might want to ask, or you might want to probe a little bit further of if they have any of these sort of conditions that's defined under the broad umbrella of ADHD. Forgetfulness is another thing. So because you don't know how to keep a task or a line of tasks or a list of tasks, you may forget to do things. You may forget to get things done. You may say yes, and you may want to do. It's not because of lack of intention. You definitely want to get those things done. So it's never for the lack of intention, but it's for your own brain that you forget to get things done. And then that's another way it manifests. And that's another way you might want to look further if someone around you is sort of demonstrating, behaving in these ways.
And what's the relation between ADHD and parenting?
Yeah, ADHD, like all aspects of life, impacts and affects parenting as well. As a parent, there are some really positives. You're spontaneous, you have high energy, you are always looking to do novel things, new things. So all those things I'm able to, being an ADHDer myself, I'm able to bring and share it with my children, all the positives. Come up with a spontaneous idea and have some high energy activity with children. But there are ways in which I struggle. For example, not being able to keep up to a commitment or a time. I've struggled with planning and timing, for example. So I would have told a particular time to my son, for example, that we will leave home at this hour, and then I'm late. Similarly, planning for an event or planning to go to a school event. Sometimes I forget to go to school or to plan to go to school. I don't forget to go to school, but sometimes I plan to forget, which means if there's a big event that my son or my daughter have, and if I did not plan on going, I have ended up not being able to go to that occasion, which is very heartbreaking for the children. So it plays out on a day-to-day basis, on a more medium, long-term basis with children, emotional connection. Sometimes I shut down because I had a big argument with my child, my son or daughter. And because of my condition, before knowing, I now know better. I know how to manage my emotions better now. But in the past, I would get very emotional, and either I'll react, I'll have a big meltdown, or a showdown, or an outburst, or I'll shut down. And which is not good for children, because children need parents with a lot more composure and understanding.
So, Subhasis, can you tell the correlation between ADHD and parenthood? How does they kind of go hand in hand?
The connection of ADHD and careers, right? I can pretty much imagine the strong connection between someone having ADHD and how their career trajectory looks like. Me being one of the examples, I've had a lot of great successes in my career. I've had a lot of ups and downs in my career, and I've obviously gone through most of my life without knowing that I have this condition. But now knowing what I have, which is diagnosed with ADHD, I can correlate all the different sort of milestones, points, pivot points, the entire trajectory of my life journey and career journey through that lens. As I mentioned, ADHD brain is capable of a lot of creativity. It's capable of a lot of hyperfocus. So people with ADHD, if they get connected to a topic, they fall in love with something, then they go very, very hyper-focused on that topic. And in that case, they become incredibly good at that, and they're very successful at that. I mean, there are some public examples of artists and athletes being very good at what they do who have ADHD. For example, Justin Timberlake, one of the most iconic singers, is publicly ADHD. And then he was able to pursue and hyper-focus on his music. So there are a lot of examples. So I think those are ways in which you can experience real career highs, but there's a flip side to it of how you can experience struggles in careers. For example, you'll struggle with planning, organizing, time management, being able to finish projects on time. Sometimes you may be having interpersonal relationship issues because of your emotional reactivity. So folks who are struggling with some of these things, I would definitely recommend them to double click on this aspect. If they're struggling with it, get themselves diagnosed. If they don't have ADHD, it's great. But if you have one, and if it's diagnosed, then it can give you a lot of tools on how you navigate your career in a workplace which expects a lot of planning, organizing, executive functioning, leadership, time management, and you could use those tools to work with your ADHD against your ADHD, and you can make it work for you. So that's a big, big correlation between how ADHD manifests in the workplace.
Okay. I'm just going to ask it. If you want, you can answer it. So, is there any pill someone can take or a process someone can follow to control or to manage their ADHD?
Yeah, there's definitely a prescribed medication to take for folks who are officially diagnosed with ADHD. You can choose to take medication or not. Obviously, it's all up to you. And the only source of getting that prescription is through a licensed psychiatrist. You cannot get a prescription from anybody for your ADHD treatment. It's very, very serious because this medication is very, very important. and you have to consult your general practitioner and a very, very experienced and licensed psychiatrist. I want to be very careful of what I'm saying here because it's very easy to kind of find any medicine on the internet or anywhere with AI. I would strongly advise anyone taking any medication from those sources. The only source is through your psychiatrist and in consultation with your doctor. So that's how I would say it.
Great. One last question. If people want to check more about ADHD, about notes, or anything about data research, where do they find? And if they want to look inside DadSense universe, where can they find this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the question is where can people find more information about ADHD? I must say in India, the public information is not that widely available. There is a lot of global organization that are doing a lot of great work in spreading awareness of ADHD. For example, in our last episode of DadSense, I spoke with my guest Neil Mankey, who happens to be the co-chair of ADHD UK. So ADHD UK, you can go to the website of adhduk.org. You can find plenty of information. You probably can get a simple assessment done if you have some of the symptoms or not. Similarly, there is ADHD awareness .org, I believe, has a lot of information. If you have any friends or if you have any psychiatrists that you can connect with locally in your city, you can get yourself diagnosed. But it's an emerging topic of awareness in India, but globally there's a lot of resources that you can use. Like I mentioned, we have dedicated a whole episode of DadSense focusing on this topic of ADHD, fatherhood, ADHD and alcohol, and you can definitely watch out for this episode, which is with my guest Neil Mankey, and get your sort of initial knowledge and the journey of understanding started. Great, thank you.